It's always good to be able to be together, especially on a special day like today, Pentecost Sunday, Memorial Day weekend. And I know for some of you, this is a holiday weekend, and maybe you're traveling, you're in town. I've already seen some folks here visiting family, and I know some other folks are out of town. And we are wrapping up the homework series this week, and with a little bit of a bonus message, but a message that I think is appropriate. And it's going to be relevant for everybody in the room, but it's not going to seem as relevant to some of you as it will to others, as have all the messages in this series. We have talked about a lot of things. We've talked about marriage, we've talked about sex, we've talked about children, and we've talked about a variety of things when it comes to the family, because we believe that God designed the family to be the primary place in which we are discipled and our characters are formed to become like Jesus. The church has an important role to play, and on today, Pentecost Sunday, we celebrate the birthday of the church. We recognize the gift that it is that binds us together, but we know that the first institution God created wasn't even the church, it was the home. It was marriage, and it was that relationship that was going to shape and forge us as we began to follow Jesus. Not just in our early years, as we're just a little child growing, certainly that's a formative time, but even as we get older, as you experience marriage yourself, marriage forges you and shapes you to be more like Jesus. It sometimes challenges you. Raising kids is a challenge if you're going to try to walk like Jesus. Can I get an amen? You face a lot of challenges when it comes to raising kids, and so even that process is forming you and shaping you. And then even as you get older, it is continuing. The family is still that place where God is forging and shaping us to become more and more like Him. It is the primary arena for spiritual formation throughout our entire lives. And in the home and in the family, this is not going to sound like a big revelation to you, but we get older, right? We age. We start as children, and we grow, and we become teenagers, and we become young marrieds, and we become young parents, and then we become empty nesters. And the process of aging is part of God's design for our spiritual formation. And we age in families, and we age together in churches, especially churches like this one, where we say it's really important for us that we are a multi-generational church with a next generation vision. As I was thinking about this message, I couldn't help but go back and think about how many of you that I've walked with over these last 18 years. And I will say something about all of you that we've been together on this 18-year journey. You're all older. And then I look in the mirror and I realize I'm older too. When I came here, Sherry and I was 36, and we had 4 children. Our youngest was 5, our oldest was 11. And so we were at a critical stage in our marriage and our parenting and our lives as we're just, trying to figure out, how do you raise these kids? How do you, first of all, keep them alive? That's like the bar was low. How do you keep them alive? And then how do you help them to grow to become, to become adults and to love Jesus and to know how much they're loved by Jesus? And we were so grateful to get to do that as part of our extended family and as a part of our church family. And I realized that as we've gone through all these stages, there were certain things and challenges that came along that were trials. There were health issues that came along. There were issues that came along every step of the way that many times seemed like discouragement or disappointment or setbacks. Some of you have gone through that. Some of you are going through that now, where you face the challenges that inevitably come with life as you're caring for a sick family member, or as you're caring for a sick child or a sick spouse. And you realize as time keeps marching on, those problems continue to come, and they don't go away. They only amplify themselves. And you begin to you can become somewhat disillusioned with, is my life the way I intended it to be? Is this the life I had hoped to lead? I'll give you just a silly example of this, and this was actually right before I came. So I love the Atlanta Braves. I'm a Braves fan. And so I noticed a few weeks ago when David was preaching, he was talking about what a big Philadelphia sports fan he was. But I noticed he really didn't talk about the Phillies this year, which I'm really glad about. I wasn't talking much about the Braves last year, but they're doing great this year. But I had this moment when I was probably about 35 years old, just right before I came here, and I'm watching a Braves game, and they're talking about the players, and they're talking about the age of the players, and there was a pitcher who came up to pitch, and he was 35, and they talked about him being a veteran and being old, and how much longer can he do this? And I remembered in that moment, I realize right now, I am probably never going to play baseball for the Atlanta Braves. Now, if you know me, you know what an incredibly ridiculous thought that was, because never in my life ever have I been athletic, never. I mean, the last time I actually played any sort of formal baseball, I was 8 years old. So what was I doing at 35 thinking, I'm never going to play for the Atlanta Braves? But it was this moment where I thought, some of the possibilities that we're born into expire, right? We get to points in our life where those are not options for us anymore. Those things are no longer options for us. And as you age, there are more and more things that become not an option for you. It's part of the process. But here's the question. Here's the question I began to ask myself. If God in all his sovereignty, if God in all of his wisdom designed the family, if he designed life itself to be the way it is it possible that as we go through those stages of life, and as we go through the disappointments and yes, even the disillusionments, is it possible that God is even using that to forge us to be in the character and in the image of Jesus? See, something inside of us changes. Something inside of me changed. And I needed to accept this, not just about not being able to play baseball for the Atlanta Braves. That's kind of silly. But the truth is, that's a reality that I need to understand and understand how God might be using those limitations in my life to draw me closer to him. At some point, each of us face a moment when the life we imagined begins to give way to the life we're actually living. At every point of our lives, we come to grips with this. It happens more the older we get, but it's not just limited to when we're older. But at every point of the journey, at some point, moment, probably many, many moments, you're going to have to come to grips with the fact that your life is not what you had hoped it would be. I've seen other people hit this stage of life, and sometimes our culture calls it a midlife crisis, right? There are unhealthy ways to address this. Like you come to a point where you realize I'm hitting all these things I'll never be able to do again. There's an unhealthy response. And so you've seen the classic examples. People have an affair. They deconstruct their faith. They go spend a lot of money and buy a fancy car. But there's also healthy ways people have come to face this challenge. People who've sort of settled in and found a sense of peace, stability. They've embraced the wisdom that comes with aging and with life. And so I began to ask myself as I thought about this, as we wrap up this series, what if the disillusionment that we face in life, what if we began to experience that, not as the end of a story, but rather as God's invitation to go with him on a journey to something even deeper? And so I asked, does the Bible have anything to say about this? And I was actually pretty encouraged because the Bible has a lot to say about this. You can read stories from the Old Testament into the New Testament and find examples of people that God used, and as they've aged and God used them, and as they have, one generation has passed off and handed the torch to the next, you can see so many examples. But I found one particular passage that I want to look at today, and a verse that struck me in a way that had never struck me before. I've read it many, many times, but I want to share it with you today. If you have a Bible, look with me at John chapter 21. John chapter 21. The Gospel of John is an incredible telling of the life of Jesus. And John's gospel actually has two endings. It's very interesting because the first ending of John's gospel is what you would expect it to be. The resurrected Jesus comes back, Thomas says, "My Lord and my God," and falls at Jesus' feet. And Jesus is, he is returned. He's triumphant. He's the Messiah. He's the Savior. But then John chapter 21 is almost like an epilogue. And it does have Jesus in it, but the main character in John chapter 21 isn't actually Jesus. The main character in John chapter 21 is actually Peter. So look with me at verses 15 through 19, and let me just catch you up to where we are in the story. So Peter and the disciples have had this encounter with the resurrected Jesus. Jesus has not appeared to them for a while. They don't know what to do. So they do what they know. Peter says, "Hey, let's go back to fishing," because that's what his job was before. That's where he started his career, was in fishing. And so the thing with Jesus, nobody knows what's happening. Nobody knows what's going to go on from here. The Pentecost hasn't happened yet. The church hasn't been born yet. And so Peter just says, "Let's go back fishing." And he takes some of the other disciples with him. They go out on the boat. They have a completely unproductive night in fishing. And on the beach, there's a person who says, hey, cast your nets on the other side. They catch this huge catch of fish. They realize it's Jesus. They come up, bring the fish onto shore. Jesus has already fixed breakfast for everybody. And this is what we read in John chapter 21, verse 15. When they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? Do you love me more than these? Now, it's interesting because we don't really know what Jesus meant by do you love me more than these. There's a lot of speculation about this. We don't have a video, so we don't know what Jesus was motioning to. Was Jesus saying to Peter, Peter, do you love me more than these fish? That's possible, right? I mean, Peter was a fisherman. This was his stock and trade. Do you love me more than the fish? Peter, do you love me more than these other disciples? Meaning two things. Do you love me more than you love them? Or do you love me more than they love me? Right? Those are all possibilities. Do you love me more than these? We don't know what it is, but I think it's interesting because the question comes back to me often in my life. I hear Jesus saying, Gary, do you love me more than these? And fill in the blank for whatever it is. But in this case, I want to say, do I love him more than my hopes and dreams? Do I love him more than the vision I have for my life? Than the things I hope would happen? Do I love him more than these? Peter's response, he said to him, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. He, Jesus, said to him, feed my lambs. Jesus said to him a second time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? He said to him, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. Jesus said, tend my sheep. Jesus said to him a third time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Peter was grieved because he said to him the third time, do you love me? And he said to him, Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you. And Jesus said to him, feed my sheep. Now, this part of the passage we've all heard probably many times before. This is known as sort of Peter's reinstatement. Jesus is forgiving Peter. Peter had denied Jesus 3 times. And so Jesus asks Peter 3 times, do you love me? Peter confesses his love 3 times. And it's almost like every confession is for each denial. And so he is forgiven. He is brought back in to relationship with Jesus and to the other disciples. And so we talk about this passage a lot. But what I want you to look at is what Jesus said next, because it is absolutely fascinating. Look with me at what comes next. Peter was grieved because he said to him, do you love me a third time? And he said to him, Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you. Jesus said, feed my sheep. Then he said this, just Jesus' words to Peter, truly, truly, I say to you, when you were young, you used to dress yourself and walk wherever you wanted. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands, and another will dress you and carry you where you do not want to go. Now, this seems like a strange thing for Jesus to say to Peter at this moment. And John adds a little commentary at the end. Look what he says. It's in parentheses in the ASV. But here's what John says about this. This he said to show by what kind of death he was going to glorify God. Now, we do know John outlived all the other disciples. And so John knows about the death of Peter. And while we don't have Peter's death recorded for us in Scripture, we do know from church history that Peter and his wife were eventually led away to Rome, where he was arrested, where he was tried, and the emperor had him executed. And he was going to be crucified in the city of Rome. And he said, I'm not worthy to die the same way Jesus died. And so he was actually crucified upside down. That's from church history. That's not in the Bible, but we've got reliable sources that tell us this. And so John, as he's listening to this, as he's reflecting back on these things Jesus said, John rightly says, hey, this was a prophecy. This was a statement of how Peter was going to die. And that is certainly true. But I think there's more to it than just that. And so after this, look what he says next. After saying this, Jesus said to Peter, follow me. Follow me. Now, if that sounds familiar to you, it should. Because when we first met Peter at the beginning of the Gospels, Jesus goes to Peter, who is fishing, just like he is now. And Jesus' words to Peter at the very beginning were what? Follow me, right? Nothing's changed. The call is exactly the same. Jesus is exactly the same. The mission is exactly the same. Peter, follow me. But when you were young, you dressed yourself and you went where you wanted to go. But there will come a time when you will not dress yourself. Others will dress you and lead you where you do not want to go. And the call is the same. Follow me. Now, I think I want to make a couple observations about this passage, and then I want to get into it in terms of what it means for us today. First of all, I think Peter had visions for his life, like we all do. Peter had hopes and dreams for what he was going to become. And certainly when Jesus came along, those visions and dreams changed, but they didn't get smaller, they got bigger. Peter had fantastic hopes and dreams for what Jesus was going to accomplish and what it would mean to be his disciple. And when Jesus was arrested and executed, all those dreams were destroyed. Peter faced incredible disillusionment. He was overwhelmed by grief. He was discouraged and disillusioned about himself. Remember, Peter was a strong person. Jesus gave him the nickname of Rocky. Remember when Peter was bold enough to say to Jesus, "Call me out on the water and I'll walk to you"? Do you remember that? And what happened? Peter actually did walk on the water for just a few minutes before he took his eyes off of Jesus and he sank beneath the waves. But he did walk on water. Peter was strong. He was courageous. He was loyal. He was the one who said to Jesus, "Even if everybody else abandons you, I will never abandon you." He was unshakable. He was the one who said to Jesus, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God," when nobody else would say something so bold. But then what happened? Life happened. Reality set in. And Peter would end up denying Jesus 3 times. He faced his own failure. He faced the discouragement and the disappointment and the disillusionment about what he thought he was a part of and what he thought it meant for him. He was even discouraged probably about Jesus. He had hoped Jesus was going to be this conquering king Messiah who was going to kick out the Romans. He was disillusioned by all of that. So what does he do at the end? He tries to go back and do what he used to do. He tries to go back to his old life of fishing because it seemed like this was the end of the story, but Jesus had other plans for him. Jesus shows up on the beach. He restores Jesus. He basically calls Peter back to his first love and says, "Peter, if you love me, you still have purpose. I still have a plan for you." He returned him to the mission, feeding the sheep. Keep going, Peter. This was Jesus' message. That disillusionment is not the end of your story. It is the doorway to a deeper one. Is it just possible that just like Peter had to go through the disillusionment to fully embrace what it was that God was calling him to do, is it just possible that the disillusionment, the discouragement, the disappointment that you are experiencing right now may not be the end of the story for you? But it may be that God is saying, "I am still calling you. I still have a plan for you. And I'm calling you to do what I've always called you to do, to trust me, to follow me." See, here's the key point. Look with me again at verse 18. Look what it says at the beginning of these words that Jesus had for Peter. When you were young, this is how it used to be. When you were young, you dressed yourself, you walked wherever you wanted to. But now look at the turn. When you are old, you will stretch out your hands and another will dress you and carry you where you do not want to go. See, life is not one continuous, uninterrupted play. It actually unfolds in 2 acts. And I think we see that in this verse. The first half of life, which Jesus is talking about when you were young, we're active, right? We dress ourselves. We go where we want to go. We're building an identity. We're building achievement. We're building a career, independence. We're taking control of life. This is how it is. My grandson Noah is 3, and he has started to want to pick out his own clothes, right? It's only the first of many things he is going to want to do by himself. That is just a normal preschool thing to do. I do it by myself. This is instinctively inside of us, right? We want to take control. We want to achieve. And then it doesn't just end when we're preschoolers, like when we're children, and then when we're teenagers. Man, it gets hard when we're teenagers, right? Because we're not quite adults, but we're not really kids, and we want to take control of things, but our parents don't want us to take control of that, but the things our parents do want us to take control of, we don't want to take control of. I mean, it's amazing any of us make it through the teenage years. But it doesn't end there. It goes on into adulthood. We finish school and we start trying to get a career, and we try to make a name for ourselves. We're trying to accomplish something. We're trying to build something, right? And then we get married. We have a spouse. If God brings us to a spouse, and we want to have children, and we're building something. We're taking control of things. Richard Rohr says this: the first half of life is devoted to building a stronger container. Building a stronger container. Everything about the first half of life is about building the container. You're wanting to set the family up. You're wanting to set the job up. You're wanting to set the house up. Everything is about what you're building. But then Act 2 starts, the second half. And in the second half of life, things are a little bit more passive. Things are a little bit more reactive. Jesus said it this way: another person will dress you and will take you where you do not want to go. We are constantly faced in the second half with surrendering our life. Not just one time when we walk an aisle surrendering it to Jesus, but we exercise surrender on a daily basis. Surrendering because of limits that are put upon us, because of health, because of finances, because of family. We need to become more dependent. We have to have greater trust. We're struggling with significance. Sherry and I have some neighbors who have lived in our neighborhood for many, many years. And just recently, they had to make the very difficult decision to move into assisted living. And their son came and helped them. And it has been incredibly painful for them to let go of the home that they've known and loved all these years. And this is part of life. Many of you have gone through this. Many of you are facing this now, or you faced it with parents. It is a stage of life where we are constantly coming face to face with limits. We're being led to where we do not necessarily want to go. To finish that Richard Rohr quote, he said this: the first half of life is devoted to building a stronger container. The second half of life is not about success, but it's about significance. It's about building something other than the container. Ronald Rosler said this: in the second half of life, we are asked to give back everything we've received. Wow. To give back everything received. Think about this. You are going to give back everything you received one way or another. Right? I mean, you're going to. Someday after you're gone, somebody's going to come into your house and they're going to pack up all your stuff. And that thing, and they're going to throw it away or take it to Goodwill, right? That thing that you've been saving all these years and you think your children are going to treasure is going to end up in a yard sale, right? Everything that we have is going to ultimately be surrendered. This is part of life. We don't want to face it. We don't want to admit it. We don't want to talk about it. But it is absolutely true. Ronald Rosler goes on and says, aging brings us face to face with limits we cannot overcome. We cannot overcome these limits. And this is where the disillusionment hits us repeatedly as we enter Act 2 of life. And it's honestly where most people get stuck, because they see this as the end of the story. They see it as life coming to an end. But again, I want to challenge you with the same idea that Jesus said to Peter. What if the disillusionment is not the end of the story? But what if it's a doorway to a deeper one? See, those who accept this stage of life and accept the disillusionment as a doorway into something deeper, they reframe what they think about aging. Henry Nouwen said this: aging is not a gradual decline into uselessness, but a gradual return to our deeper self. Eugene Peterson said this: the older I get, the more I realize that I am not the center of the story. See, this is why God has placed us in families. This is why I think it's important for us as a church to continue to strive to be a multi-generation church with a next generation vision, because we need each other. We need the energy and optimism of youth, and we need the stability and wisdom of age. That's why we continue to say we're a multi-generation church with a next-generation vision. Not because we are going to live in the past, but because we recognize that we need the wisdom of the past if we're going to shape the future as God continues to call his church forward to follow him. This is the call. The call has not changed for any of us. It's a picture of what the family is supposed to be. Children need guidance. Adults need support. Older adults need purpose. The family is the place where both halves of life are held together, where the young learn and the old find purpose, where formation continues from generation to generation. Jean Vanier said this, "As we grow older, we discover that we need each other more, not less." What a gift. What a gift that is. That God actually forges in our family a dependence, an interdependence that we have for one another. And this is how we have to learn to live within the boundaries that God is setting for us. Not just when we're older, but at every stage of our life. One of my favorite verses, Psalm 16:6, says, "The boundary lines have fallen for me in pleasant places." It goes on to say, "Surely I have a delightful inheritance." I have really come to accept this idea that maybe, just maybe, the boundary lines that I'm running up against in my life, maybe they were put there by God. Maybe they were given to me for a purpose to accept something good from him, not to keep me from something, but to rather save me for something. The first half of life, we push boundaries. We look for them. We test them. We resist limits. But in the second half of life, we're called to receive boundaries, to trust God's limits. What once felt like restriction can become grace. St. John of the Cross said this, "In the evening of life, we will be judged on love alone." In the evening of our life, we'll be judged on love alone. See, when we're younger, we think we're going to be judged by what we accomplish, what we do, what we know, what we have. But the older we get, the more we realize none of that is ultimately what matters. What ultimately matters is love. Not success, not achievement, not control, love. When you are young, you build your life. When you are old, you surrender your life. But in both seasons, you're in the process of becoming the person God has meant you to be all along. That he has made you to be. He's forging you into something. And from the youngest person in the room right now to the oldest person in the room right now, God still has purpose and plans for you. He still is calling you, and the call has not changed. Follow me. One of my favorite Old Testament characters is the character of Joshua. And Joshua's story is not always obvious in the Bible, because the story of Joshua actually begins much earlier than just the book of Joshua. We get a lot of insight into him, his leadership, and what he did in the book of Joshua. But actually, if you go all the way back into the book of Exodus, you can find Joshua as a young man in the book of Exodus. And in the book of Exodus, he is Moses' assistant. He is with Moses. You can see him referenced many times. But as he is following along with Moses, he reaches that point where it's time for Moses to pass the mantle of leadership on. And Joshua is going to pick that mantle up, and he's going to go on, and he is going to follow and carry the children of Israel into the promised land. Moses got them out of Egypt. It's Joshua who carries them into the promised land. One generation gives to the next, and we see the story continue. And there's probably the most famous verse in the book of Joshua is a fantastic verse for us to end this series on, because Joshua says this in Joshua 24:15, "Choose this day whom you will serve, but as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." Some of you may even have that verse printed somewhere at your home or on a plaque. I know David a few weeks ago mentioned that he grew up in a house where that was outside of his door. But the thing about this verse that's important to remember, this statement that Joshua made, is that this statement was not made by Joshua as a young man at the peak of his career. This statement was not made when he was at the peak of his power and of his control. This statement was made at the end of his life, at the end of his career. As he is about to pass off the scene, and he gathers the children of Israel around as a very old man, and he stands up before them and he speaks into them, and he says, "Choose this day." What day? What day is that? This day. This day. Well, what is this day? Well, if you're here today and you're a teenager, it's right now, while you're a teenager. If you're here today and you are a young married couple with children, preschoolers, and that, it's today. If you're here today and you're an empty nester, it's today. If you're here today and you're a senior adult, it's today. Choose this day whom you will serve. You can't go back and do anything about yesterday. And you can't guarantee anything about tomorrow. And so the call from Joshua for each and every one of us at every stage of life is to choose this day whom you will serve. And then he makes this statement, but as for me and my house, think about that. That Joshua, we don't know anything about his family really, almost nothing about his family. And yet, what is he saying? He is saying, I am choosing this day and every day for me and for the people in my house that we will serve the Lord. Who will you become? And you think, well, my becoming days are over. No, they're not. If God's still giving you breath, you are still in the process of becoming. Who will you become? Who will your family become? God's invited us to choose him today. If you're old, it's not too late. If you're young, it's never too early. And so I want to encourage you, all of us together, as we wrap up the homework series with one last homework assignment. First of all, identify which half of life you're currently in. Are you in the building half or the surrendering half? And some of you are like, I don't know, I'm somewhere in the middle. Right? I'm somewhere in the middle. And the truth is, there are aspects of our life where maybe we're building and maybe we're surrendering. You might find it that way, but in general, which half of life are you in? And then I want you to ask yourself this question: where is God asking me to trust him more deeply? Is there a limitation or a boundary marker that God is setting for you right now, and you are resisting it, but is it just possible? And maybe it's not, but is it possible that it is God who has set that boundary marker there? And that boundary marker is an invitation for you to trust him. Second question, what limits do I need to receive as grace? What if that boundary marker is actually evidence of God's grace for you? To receive it with grace and as grace. And then if you're really courageous, one more question that you have to ask someone else. Ask someone else, what do you see God forming in me right now? To get the outside perspective. See, you are not just living your life and existing in a family. Every single one of us, we are still in the process of becoming something. We are still in the process of hearing Jesus' invitation to follow me. We're still in the process every day of choosing this day who we will serve. Your family is shaping you, and you are helping to shape your family and future generations. And God wants to use every stage of life, every stage of your existence, every relationship in your life to shape you into someone who is loving like Jesus is loving, who is walking in the image of Jesus, who is following him for the mission that he has for you. Whether you're beginning or whether you're coming to the end, may we all commit ourselves to follow Jesus. I'm going to ask you to pray. And as we close this series out, just give you an opportunity here to reflect for just a few minutes on where you are. Are you building or are you surrendering?